You step through the weathered gatehouse. Just as the last rays of daylight vanish behind the parapets, the heavy wooden door groans on its hinges and closes behind you with a finality that feels permanent. Inside the outer wall, the castle breathes differently than the world beyond. The air smells of stone and cold iron, and something faintly musty, like wet wool and old bread. You pause. A torch sputters in a bracket near the archway, struggling against a breeze that seems to come from nowhere. Already your fingers are going numb. Welcome home, noble one. You live in a castle now. Congratulations, you've inherited centuries of prestige, acres of farmland, a very stern steward named Osric, and what can only be described as a carefully engineered refrigerator with battlements. This place wasn't designed for comfort. It was designed to keep you alive during sieges, rebellions, and possibly arguments over land boundaries with the Earl of Warwick. The walls are several feet thick, built of limestone or granite, hauled from quarries miles away by laborers who were probably promised wages and ended up with soup. In places like Dover Castle, the walls rise over 20 feet high and run deep into the ground. In theory, nothing could break through them. In practice, everything still gets in: wind, damp, the occasional bat, and definitely the cold. You walk down a corridor. The stones beneath your boots are slick with centuries of wear. Echoes follow you like loyal dogs. Your chamber is near the inner ward. Prime real estate. If you ignore the draft that seems to whistle directly through the walls, there's a hearth here, yes, but most of the heat escapes up the flue. What little remains settles around the fire in a halo of warmth about the size of a goat. The rest of the room is arctic. You layer up: tunic, hose, cloak, wool overcloth, hat, scarf, possibly a spare curtain, and still feel your teeth vibrating. In 1297, an inventory from Kenilworth Castle recorded 6 different types of cloaks owned by the lord's household. It wasn't fashion, it was survival, and even the best wool cloak turns into a damp sponge when it snows through the shutters. You sit on your bed, which is a frame of creaking timber, topped with a mattress stuffed with straw, maybe wool, if you're lucky, maybe feathers, if you're very lucky, and someone hasn't borrowed them for the falconer's hut. The sheets scratch. The blanket weighs 20 pounds and smells faintly of smoke, tallow, and roasted turnip. You lie back and watch your breath mist in the air. Inside, indoors, in a room with a fire, the stone walls around you radiate chill. Cold seeps in like fog and pools around your ankles. You shiver. You whisper a curse. Somewhere in the distance, a hound howls, probably just reacting to the draft under the West Tower gate, or possibly sensing the arrival of a ghost. Ghosts are practically part of the architecture. And then there's the wind. It doesn't howl, it screams, through arrow slits, through keyholes, through the narrow cracks around wooden doors, warped by centuries of wet winters and bad hinges. Tapestries hang on the walls, not for decoration, but for defense against air that seems to attack from all sides. In 1389, the castle of Vincennes in France ordered tapestries made of wool, dyed dark blue, to be hung in sleeping chambers, precisely to ward off the drafts that made the lord's wife swear in Latin. Your candle flickers. The flame bends sideways. You try to sleep. You wrap yourself like a burrito in wool and furs and tuck the ends under your feet. The dog jumps on the bed, curls up by your knees and sighs like a tired soldier. You're both in this together. You try to imagine warmth, a summer fair, a festival in Bordeaux, a hot bath, a real hot bath, not the kind where a servant wheels in a barrel and fills it with 3 buckets of water that smell like boiled cabbage. Eventually, you drift off, briefly, then nature calls. You wake up with a full bladder and a sense of impending doom, because relieving yourself in a medieval castle is an adventure. There's the garderobe, a narrow stone chamber built like a ledge out over the moat, with a seat carved directly into the rock. Sometimes there's a wooden cover, sometimes not. Either way, the wind blows straight through, and what lies below is a slurry of everything ever flushed in the last 6 months. In Harlech Castle, a surviving garderobe chute still drains into the outer defensive ditch. It was described by one chronicler as most efficient and most foul. You make your way through the cold hallway. Your breath trails behind you like smoke. The torch sputters. The draft strengthens. You reach the garderobe, brace yourself, and sit. You immediately regret every decision that brought you to this moment. The wind is not your friend. It is an enemy with claws. You finish quickly, return to your chamber, and fumble for your bed with numb fingers. If you're one of the lucky ones, you have a chamber pot instead, a ceramic bowl, glazed if you're rich, that sits beneath the bed and dares you to use it without spilling. In 1315, a complaint was lodged in an English manor about a servant who emptied a chamber pot out the window directly onto the chapel roof. He was fined and reassigned to mucking out the pig pens. Justice was swift. You finally return to your mattress, now slightly warmer, thanks to the dog, the lingering scent of medieval sanitation. You pull the blanket over your face. The fire has gone out. The embers crackle once, then die. The wind hisses. Morning arrives. It is gray. It is cold. It is rude. A servant enters with a tray of pottage, oats, leeks, yesterday's carrot, and something that might be mutton or might be regret. You eat it with a wooden spoon and try not to think about flavor. Flavor is for feast days and fiction. Most days, you eat to not starve. You finish the pottage. It finishes you. Today, you must attend to your duties. You dress, slowly, layer by layer, hose, braise, linen undershirt, wool tunic, overtunic, belt, cloak, a coif for your head, boots for your feet. They're made of leather and absolutely not waterproof. If you step in a puddle, they'll soak through by lunch and freeze by dinner. You try to summon the energy to leave your room. A rat skitters past the hearth. You both nod at each other, mutual survivors. You make your way down to the hall, where the steward is already organizing firewood and arguing with the cook over the disappearance of 3 turnips. In 1422, at Warkworth Castle, a noble family recorded the theft of 2 chickens and a handful of garlic cloves. The punishment? A fine, plus a week sleeping in the gatehouse with the guards and the goose. The goose was reportedly vindictive. The great hall is full of people. Servants, pages, visiting clerics, a troubadour who's been here too long, and possibly a minor noble who hasn't yet realized he overstayed his welcome. It's loud, castles echo, every footstep, every cough, every complaint bounces off the stone walls like an insult looking for a fight. You sip watered ale, eat a crust of bread that could serve as a roof tile, and wish for silence. But silence is rare. Even at night, someone is moving. The guards shift. The dogs bark. Someone drops a pitcher. Someone else starts snoring like a blacksmith bellows. And then there are the fires. Fires burn constantly. In the kitchen, in the hearths, in the braziers that line the halls. And every fire is a risk. A single stray ember in the tapestries, rushes and straw-stuffed mattresses go up like a bonfire in a flour mill. In 1212, part of Rochester Castle was lost to a fire started by a dropped candle. The chronicler simply wrote, and the hall was remade, at great expense and greater frustration. Fire doesn't care if you're noble. It burns tapestries the same way it burns peasant carts, without smoke detectors, without proper chimneys, without anyone sober enough to manage fire safety. You live on the edge of warmth and disaster. Still, you survive. You adapt. You find your rhythm. You learn to tuck your cloak under your legs at night. You learn where the drafts are and which stones to avoid stepping on barefoot. You learn that the dog prefers the right side of the bed, and that the servants gossip more in Latin than you'd expect. And at the end of the day, when the torches dim and the wind rises again, you pull the blanket over your nose, listen to the rain hit the battlements, and let your mind drift far, far away. You're not warm. You're not entirely comfortable, but you're still here, still noble, still in your castle, and that, for now, is enough. You wake to the sound of a wooden pail clattering on stone. Somewhere in the corridor, someone has dropped the morning water bucket, and the castle reacts like it always does, with echoing displeasure. The thud ricochets off every vaulted archway, bouncing down staircases and up towers, waking the pigeons and possibly a steward who swore last night he'd sleep until Mass. You lie still for a moment, eyes closed, trying to will yourself back into sleep, but the chill has already crept back beneath your blanket, and the dog has abandoned you for a warm sunbeam near the window. You sigh and sit up. The room is lit only by the gray wash of a reluctant dawn. Outside, the clouds are the color of old wool, and inside, everything feels damp in the way only ancient castles can manage. The fire is out. The hearth is cold. There's a patch of frost in the corner where the wind has slipped through the shutters again. You pull on your tunic with hands still stiff from sleep. The wool clings like a damp towel. Your maid enters without knocking, because that's just how life works here. Privacy is a theory, charming in principle, impossible in practice. She's already carrying a basin of water and a towel that smells faintly of vinegar and lavender, which is the medieval equivalent of fresh linen. She nods a good morning, places the items on a stool near your bed, and begins tidying without a word. You mutter thanks, still half asleep, and shuffle toward the water. It's icy. You splash your face and gasp like someone hit you with a fish. This, you think, is the glamorous life of nobility. Cold water, cold rooms, cold stew. As you dress layer by layer, undershirt, hose, woolen undertunic, heavier surcoat, belt, cloak, and the daily argument with your boots. You try to remember what day it is. You think it's Thursday, or possibly St. Wulfstan's feast day. Either way, it's not a market day, which means no distractions, just work, meetings, letters, some mild panic about firewood supplies, and possibly trying to explain to your steward why the falconer's boy accidentally released a prized hawk last night because he mistook it for an owl. Again, you head toward the solar, the room where you do most of your sitting and none of your relaxing. The solar sounds sunny, but it's really just a slightly warmer room above the great hall, with a few high windows and a table, where parchment and wax tend to pile up like autumn leaves. On your way, you pass by several other nobles, servants and hangers-on, all of whom seem to know your schedule better than you do. One of them hands you a letter sealed with red wax. You break it open and squint. It's from your cousin Alaric, who is still living at Framlingham Castle, and apparently now claims he's found Roman coins under the pigsty and wants permission to start digging tunnels. You make a mental note to ignore him until at least Epiphany. The steward meets you near the great hall with a stack of complaints. The roof in the eastern chapel is leaking again. The blacksmith wants more iron. The nuns from the priory down the hill are refusing to return the ceremonial chalice they borrowed for Christmas, and someone, probably the cook, has started drying fish in the armory again. You listen with the patience of someone who has accepted that castle. Life is less about jousts and more about damp inventory lists and territorial livestock. You make decisions. You issue orders. You try not to sound too tired. And then, mercifully, it's time for a walk. You step out into the upper bailey, pulling your cloak tighter as the wind greets you like an old enemy. The courtyard is busy. scullery maids scrubbing benches, a page boy chasing a goose that has absolutely declared war, and 2 guards practicing with quarter staves near the stable. The stables themselves are pungent, warm, in their way, but not a place you linger unless you enjoy hay in your mouth and the occasional deeply offended look from a draft horse. You head up the stone stairs to the battlements. It's your favorite part of the castle. Partly for the view, partly because it's the only place people aren't always talking. From here, you can see the gray-green fields stretching toward the horizon, the river winding lazily past the outer walls, the forest where deer vanish like smoke, and where last winter you were nearly unhorsed by a flock of very aggressive owls. The wind is sharp, but up here it feels cleaner, colder, yes, but honest. No smoke, no kitchen smells, no chamber pot fumes, just cold, sky, and silence. You lean on the stone parapet and watch the guards change shifts. The new captain is young and trying too hard. He salutes with flair, then immediately drops his spear. You pretend not to notice. Below, the main gate creaks open for a merchant caravan bringing in salted fish, barley, and a cart full of beeswax candles. You're especially thankful for the candles. Your last one dripped all over your best riding cloak, and you've only just gotten the tallow out with a brick and some prayer. As the sun begins to climb, slowly, with the reluctance of someone climbing out of a very warm bed, you make your way back down to the kitchens, not because you need to, but because the kitchen is the warmest room in the castle. You pass under the vaulted arches, past storage cellars and ale barrels, until the scent of bread and meat hits you like a friendly avalanche. The kitchen is chaos. Always is. The head cook is shouting at a young boy who tried to season the stew with apple cider. A scullery maid is polishing a copper pot with such fury it may turn to dust. A cat darts across the floor with something stolen in its mouth. Possibly meat. Possibly a sock. You don't ask. You sit near the hearth, on a low bench that's probably intended for servants. But no one questions you. Nobility earns you a chair. Exhaustion earns you a corner. One of the cooks hands you a hunk of bread and a smear of soft cheese. You eat slowly. The bread is warm, crusty, and surprisingly fresh. The cheese is pungent but edible. You've had worse, much worse. In 1354, an abbot near Durham reportedly wrote in his journal that he had eaten a soft yellow cheese of the sort that tastes of wood and curdled sorrow. You've eaten that cheese, possibly more than once. As the fire crackles and the sounds of lunch preparation begin to rise, onions being chopped, pots being stirred, a goose being chased back out of the pantry, you close your eyes for a moment. Just a moment. The bench is hard, the air is thick with flour and smoke, but there's something oddly comforting about it. This place, for all its cold and noise and endless complaints, is yours. You'll go back upstairs soon. You'll read letters, answer messengers, argue with Osric about whether the granary needs more hinges. You'll walk the battlements again, listen to minstrels who don't know when to stop, and sit through another loud, chaotic, questionably seasoned dinner in the great hall. But for now, in the kitchen warmth, you let your shoulders drop. You breathe in the scent of thyme and burning bread, and you remind yourself, life in a castle is not about luxury, it's about survival with a hint of ceremony. And somehow, you set her doing it. You return to your chamber after lunch, stepping through the narrow arched doorway, with a belly full of oniony stew, and a vague sense that someone somewhere has moved your chair. The tapestry near your bed shifts slightly as a gust sneaks in from the cracked shutter. You pause, lift a corner, and discover what appears to be a collection of dead beetles, and something that might once have been bread. You let it be. At this point, unless it starts moving again, it's not your concern. You sit, not in your favorite chair it's still missing, but on the edge of your lumpy straw-stuffed mattress, The mattress creaks ominously, as if offended by your presence. You sigh. The fire's been relit. Barely. It sputters in the hearth, like it's doing you a favor. You consider throwing a log on, then remember that firewood is in short supply, and Osric has already warned you not to burn wood like you're a Roman emperor. You resist the urge. Outside the window, you hear the distant bleat of sheep. The flock has been moved up near the orchard to graze down the weeds and fertilize the soil in their uniquely pungent way. This is called multitasking. You also hear the sharp report of hammering, likely the blacksmith mending a broken hinge, or possibly crafting his weekly contribution to the growing pile of things the steward hasn't asked for. You lean back. The chamber is quiet now. Almost. The wind breathes through cracks in the stone. The dog sighs in his sleep. Somewhere beneath the floor, a rat is dragging something far heavier than it should be able to. You close your eyes and try to think warm thoughts. And then, a knock. Not a knock so much as a tap. A brush. A hesitant thump. You open one eye. It's your valet, appearing with the speed and subtlety of a disgruntled ghost. He announces that the bishop's representative has arrived and would like to speak with you before sunset, if it pleases you, which is valet code for they're already downstairs and have opinions. You dress again, this time more formally. A better cloak, cleaner hose, and the circlet, with the stitched edging that tells people you're important, but not obnoxiously so. You descend the spiral staircase, feeling every cold stone through the soles of your boots. The representative is waiting in the solar, holding a goblet like it owes him rent. He greets you warmly, as bishops' men do, and immediately begins discussing the state of the chapel roof. You nod, you agree, you murmur supportively, as he lists repairs that will require timber, lead, tiles, and probably a miracle. You glance down and realize he's left muddy prints across your favorite rush mat. You breathe deeply through your nose. This is diplomacy. Eventually, the visit ends. You escort the man down to the main gate, where his horse is so well fed, it's practically smug. You wave, smile, then turn back toward the great hall, thinking longingly of solitude. Instead, you are greeted by the sounds of 3 children screaming and a juggler attempting to recite a poem while dodging what appears to be an onion. You detour to the chapel. The castle chapel is small, tucked near the inner curtain wall. Its windows are high and narrow, its floor uneven, and the scent of beeswax and stone fills the air. You sit in the back pew not to pray, though you might, but because it's the only place in the entire fortress that isn't currently being used to store turnips, gossip, or relatives. You stare at the flickering votive candles. Their light dances on the stone like water. You feel yourself begin to exhale. The chapel was built during your grandfather's time. The altar is carved oak. The tiles along the floor were imported from Normandy, though several have been replaced with local stone since someone dropped a mace during Advent 2 years ago. The statue of Saint Edmund has a crack down his face and is missing 2 fingers. Some say it was lightning. Others say the cook's assistant tripped with a ladder. Both stories are probably true. A monk shuffles past behind you. He nods without speaking. You nod back. In this brief, shared silence, you find something rare in castle life: mutual understanding and a mutual desire not to speak unless it's absolutely necessary. Eventually, the peace ends. It always does. You return to your chamber once again, now colder than before. The fire is dead. The shutters creak. Your blanket is missing. You find it on the floor under the dog, who has somehow turned it into a nest. You reclaim it with minimum fuss and lie down for a moment, telling yourself you'll just close your eyes. You wake to darkness. Full, rich, deep night. The castle is quieter now. Not silent, never silent, but quieter. The wind whistles. The dog grumbles in his sleep, Somewhere, water drips into a bucket at regular intervals. You stare at the ceiling beams. One of them creaks, possibly from settling, possibly from rats, possibly from ghosts. You sit up, toss on your cloak, and make your way through the corridor. The walls sweat in winter, stone condensation that seeps down in slow, sticky trails. You head toward the garderobe, because your bladder respects neither sleep nor status. It's cold, colder than it was this morning, and when you sit, you feel every breath of wind through that cursed chute. You return to bed, feeling like a thawed corpse, and tuck in, as best you can. Your thoughts drift to old stories, tales of haunted towers and castles cursed with eternal winter. You've read them. You've half-believed some. Caerlaverock Castle, it said, once had a ghost that slammed shutters all night long. Conwy had tales of a headless monk and a gate that wouldn't stay closed. Even your own household has whispered of the West Tower, where a torch is sometimes seen burning when no one is there. You bury your head under the blanket and breathe deeply. The cold is merciless, but the quiet is real. No bells, no pigeons, just the faint crackle of the last ember. And then the child starts crying, somewhere in the adjacent chamber. A noble guest's infant has awoken, and the sound drills into your ear like a cursed dagger of sleeplessness. You groan, turn over, and pray for either divine mercy or thicker walls. Eventually, the wailing fades. Eventually, the dog shifts back toward you, a living foot warmer, with fleas. Eventually, your mind stops replaying every conversation from today, and all the ways you could have answered differently. And then, finally, sleep returns, not sweet, not silent, but enough. Because in a medieval castle, enough is the highest luxury. Morning comes again, and this time the light is sharper, not warm, not golden. This is castle morning light, the kind that slants in through arrow slits and makes you feel like a prisoner of sunrise. It lands directly on your face, because of course it does, and drags you awake before you're ready. You roll over and discover your cloak has slid off in the night. Your feet are numb. The dog has claimed the warmer half of the mattress and is pretending to be asleep. You groan quietly and sit up. Your bones creak. Your breath mists. Your brain lags behind your body like a servant who slept through the first bell. You pull on yesterday's tunic, because that's what there is. Linen underthings aren't changed daily, and outer layers even less. It's not laziness. It's life. You rub your arms through the sleeves, still cold, still a little itchy from whatever the laundress used last time. Probably lie, possibly vengeance. The castle is already stirring. Voices echo faintly through the corridors. Boots on stone. A distant clang of a pot in the kitchen, followed by a swear word you pretend not to recognize. Someone is singing, badly. It might be a page boy, or it might be a ghost with a grudge against melody. You find your boots, and pull them on with a kind of resignation only castle dwellers truly understand. One is still damp. You do not ask why. Downstairs, the great hall is coming to life in that chaotic medieval rhythm. Half military camp, half wandering theater troupe. Servants bustle, noble children argue over turnips, and a clerk from the estate office is already trying to corner you about wheat yields before you've had a sip of ale. You wave him off and head toward the high table. Breakfast today is more of a suggestion than a meal. Bread so hard it could break a tooth, cheese that smells older than your aunt, and a lukewarm mug of ale thin enough to offend both brewer and saint. You eat in silence while a bard practices something in the corner, badly plucking a lute and muttering the wrong verse of a ballad about Saint Alban. A messenger arrives before you finish. He's winded, muddy, and entirely too enthusiastic for the hour. You wipe your hands and take the scroll. It's from the reeve of your northern holdings. There was a fire, a barn, 2 pigs, and 1 very drunk laborer are gone. You sigh, you nod. You hand the scroll to your steward, who immediately begins mumbling logistics to himself. After breakfast comes the morning procession of mildly important people, all trying to catch your attention. First, the armorer wants more funds to repair the mail hauberks that have rusted after the last rainfall. Then the baker complains about rats in the flour barrels again. He wants cats. The steward wants traps. The chaplain wants prayer. Then a visiting cousin corners you to inquire, in alarming detail, about a marriage proposal involving someone you've never heard of, and a piece of land you didn't know you owned. You excuse yourself and retreat to the gardens. Castle gardens are not soft. They are not charming. They are half medicine, half kitchen, half bramble. And yes, that's too many halves, but so is life here. The herbs grow in clumps of personality, parsley beside mint, lavender near sage, and one suspiciously violent patch of nettles that no one wants to claim. A kitchen maid is already out there, gathering leeks and glaring at the rosemary bush like it owes her money. You walk past a low wall and find a sunny patch. You sit. You close your eyes. You breathe. This is your favorite moment. The quiet between responsibilities, the pause before more complaints. You sit on the edge of your castle's garden, warmed by the briefest hint of sun, and listen. Birds, wind, a goat making decisions you don't approve of near the stables. You remember reading once, possibly in a half-finished manuscript in the scriptorium, that Edward the Furt personally inspected his castle gardens when visiting Caerlaverock, not because he was particularly fond of plants, but because someone had stolen the kitchen onions and hidden them under the chapel stairs. History, you think, is mostly onions and arguments. You return to your chambers briefly, only to find the laundress has taken your second cloak and left a note on your chair, explaining that it smelled wrong. You accept this judgment without protest. The dog is still asleep on your blanket. You give up and decide it's time for the mid-morning rounds. You tour the curtain walls, nodding at guards who are half asleep and fully pretending not to be. The new porter at the gatehouse tries to impress you by reciting the guard schedule from memory. He gets half of it wrong. You thank him anyway. He beams. You stop by the training yard, where two squires are dueling with wooden swords, and too much enthusiasm. One hits the other in the ankle. The other swears. You remember your own training, bruises, sweat, the cold sting of steel against skin. Nobility didn't excuse you from discipline. If anything, it made it worse. You had to be harder, more prepared, because if a siege ever came, and they often did, it wasn't your steward who'd man the wall first. It was you. A siege. The word makes you shiver. You've read the records. Rochester Castle, 1215, when rebels held out against King John's siege for nearly 2 months. They ate horseflesh, rats, and whatever they could boil into a broth. When the tower finally collapsed under sapping and fire, survivors crawled out broken and starving. Chateau Gaillard, Normandy, once called the most beautiful fortress in France, besieged by the French in 1203. The outer defenses fell, the walls were breached. Women and children, who had been expelled by the defenders to save rations, died between the lines. And here you are, in your own stone shell, high towers, deep ditches, but none of it guarantees safety. You walk the ramparts now with a different sense. You check the wall's edge, the gaps in the crenellations, the gate locks. You ask the guard captain about the state of the iron portcullis. He answers confidently, though you notice he doesn't quite meet your eye. Back in the hall by midday, lunch is served, pottage again, thicker this time, with what might be rabbit, and a few withered peas, a heel of bread. You eat it all, because that's what's there. The lord of the castle eats what everyone else eats, just more of it, slightly better seasoned, slightly warmer. A storm is coming. someone says. You glance at the sky and believe them. You can feel it in your teeth. You finish your meal and return to your room. The blanket is back, folded, still warm. The dog is elsewhere. You sit. You exhale. The wind picks up. Thunder rolls far away. The way it always starts. Low, lazy, and too far to matter. For now, you close your eyes and let your head rest against the stone wall. It's cold, but solid. You let it hold you. Because in a castle, rest doesn't come often, and when it does, you take it. The storm arrives in the evening, not with the drama of legends or the fury of omens, but with the slow certainty of a tax collector. First, the clouds gather in silence, thick, bruised things that seem to press down against the ramparts. Then the wind begins to speak again, louder now, threading through every slit and gap in the castle like a burglar searching for weaknesses. By the time you reach your chamber, the rain has begun in earnest, tapping on the stone window arch like a persistent cousin demanding to be let in. You sit near the hearth, watching the first fat drops streak across the arrow slit. The fire has been coaxed back to life by the chambermaid, a young girl with more sense than 3 of your stewards combined. She said nothing, lit the fire, adjusted the logs, and vanished like a shadow in reverse. You appreciate that. Words take effort. Outside, the downpour intensifies. You hear it hammering on the slate tiles above the chapel and rattling the wooden shutter near your bed. You get up, lean close, and press your fingers to the seam. The cold bites instantly. You pull your hand back. The dog has returned, wet and smelling of barn. He thumps down onto the floor near the fire and sighs as if the entire storm is his personal burden. You throw your cloak across the chair and sink onto the bed. The mattress is no softer than yesterday, but you've stopped expecting comfort. Instead, you listen. The rain, the wind, the distant sound of a shutter slamming open somewhere across the bailey, followed by a flurry of cursing, a servant's voice shouting into the wind, a rope being pulled, the thump of something heavy dropped, maybe firewood, maybe a person. Storms in a medieval castle are not cozy. They're not songs by the hearth or tales told over mulled wine. They are cold, loud, wet reminders that your fortress is still just a collection of stone and wood and hope. You can feel the walls hum with every gust. Somewhere below, water is pooling. You know this because it always does. You close your eyes and think of other places, warm places, southern courts, Sicily perhaps. You once met a knight who'd served in Palermo. He spoke of sunlit towers and olive groves and stone that stayed warm even at night. He also said the fleas were worse there. You're not sure if that was meant as a consolation. Dinner is delayed. The kitchen chimney has flooded again, and the cook refuses to serve anything until the ceiling stops dripping into the stew pot. You understand, reluctantly. You chew a strip of salted beef instead, dry and so hard you worry it might damage your teeth. You wash it down with spiced ale. The spices were a gift from a passing merchant who thought a few pinches of cinnamon might buy him tax exemption. It didn't, but the ale is better for it. Later, you walk the hallways in a half-daze. Torches gutter in their brackets. Rushlights flicker and hiss in damp corridors. You pass by servants, murmuring behind their hands, guards sheltering under cloaks, and the minstrel again. He's huddled under a tapestry, scribbling lyrics about a swan and a shoemaker. You do not ask. In the chapel, a monk is lighting candles, one by one. Each flame seems to shiver in protest at being born into this cold. He nods when he sees you. You sit in the back again, as you always do, your cloak pulled tight around you, the scent of wet stone rising from the floor, like a prayer that forgot what it was asking for. Thunder rolls overhead now, not sharp, not angry, just endless. like stones grinding together in the sky. You wonder if the towers shake. Probably not. But in the storm, everything feels alive in the wrong way. You feel it in your ribs, in your jaw. You imagine the keep listing slightly, just a touch, as if testing its own weight. You stay longer than usual in the chapel, not for piety, for quiet, for dryness, for warmth, by proximity. The monk doesn't ask questions. He offers a candle. You light it. It smells faintly of sheep tallow and lavender. You wonder, briefly, what the saints think of the modern quality of wax. Eventually you leave, stepping carefully over the uneven flagstones, past the warped oak door, and back into the heart of the castle. The wind catches your cloak, tries to pull you sideways. You lean into it. It whistles past your ears and tugs at your hair like a child demanding attention. Back in your chamber, the fire has almost gone out again. The dog has taken your spot. You don't argue. You drop your wet cloak on a stool, wrestle the blanket away from the mutt, and lie down on the edge of the bed, legs still wrapped in damp hose, toes curling involuntarily. You blow out the candle. Darkness takes the room like ink in water, and then the dripping begins. Not inside, thank heaven, but close. Somewhere above the ceiling, water is trickling steadily down a wall, hitting something hollow. You listen to it, eyes closed, counting each drop. You imagine it filling a bucket, then overflowing, then seeping into the beams. In 1281, chroniclers recorded a collapse at Pembroke Castle, an entire side chamber lost due to water damage and rot in the timber supports. The entry notes the loss of 2 stewards, 1 sack of grain, and a cat of considerable size. You remember reading that as a boy and wondering whether the cat had a name. Now you wonder if it had a blanket. The sound of dripping continues. You try to ignore it, try to drift. Sleep does come. Eventually, not all at once, not sweetly. It arrives like a sullen tenant, demanding space and not promising peace. You dream of open sky, of dry boots, of a feast where no one talks about roof tiles. Then thunder cracks again, closer now, and you are awake. You turn over. You grumble. The dog sighs. The storm rages on. The storm is still with you the next morning. It hasn't lessened, merely changed its shape. Less thunder now, more steady sheets of rain that hiss against the battlements and spill down the walls in thick curtains. You wake in darkness again, not because it's early, but because the clouds have sealed the sun away like a relic. There's a weight to the air, as though the sky itself has dropped onto the castle roof and intends to stay there. Your bones ache, not dramatically, just enough to remind you that stone is not forgiving, that drafty towers are not spas, and that sleeping fully clothed in a lumpy bed while listening to centuries-old masonry groan under wet pressure is not the balm it might sound like. You sit up. The fire is out again. Of course it is. The blanket is gone again. The dog, again, has taken it. You look at him. He opens one eye, stretches out to claim more space, and resumes sleeping. There's a bucket in the far corner now. One of the maids must have noticed the leak near the beam. You hear the regular drip, drip, drip of water falling into it like a monk tapping out penance. You shiver. You dress without speaking. No one's here to hear you anyway. When you open the door, a gust of wind slaps you with the smell of wet straw, cold stone, and something faintly fungal. The corridor is dim, the torches smoking sullenly in their iron sconces. You pass a servant, dragging a bundle of wet cloaks toward the laundry. She looks at you as if to ask if your cloak is also soaked. You keep walking. You will not part with your only dry layer. Not yet. Down in the great hall, there is mutiny. Not swords drawn, not shouts or banners, but the quiet kind. The kitchen staff are refusing to serve the stew until someone clears the standing water that's pooled near the hearth. A night has arrived, drenched and irritated, demanding a place to dry his mail. Several guards are arguing over whether the south-facing archery slit near the latrines is leaking or simply crying from neglect. Osric, your steward, is there in the middle of it all, trying to look calm while holding 2 damp scrolls and a clay pot of salt that has turned to paste. You take a seat. Someone hands you a trencher of stale bread and cold cheese. Not because you asked for it, but because that's what there is. You chew slowly, because chewing quickly might dislodge a tooth. The cheese is suspiciously blue, though not the kind that means someone intended it to be that way. You try to listen to Osric's report. The barley sacks have been moved. The outer stair by the smithy is slick and dangerous. The carpenter's boy slipped on it last night and dislocated a shoulder. The boy is fine, he says. The stair is not. Also, the well rope has frayed. Again. You nod. You nod again. You wonder if your nods mean anything anymore. A messenger arrives shortly after. Not one of yours. He wears the colors of the Lord from the neighboring valley, the one with 3 fewer teeth than he should have, and a tendency to accuse trees of trespassing. The message is polite, formal, and laced with the kind of pleasantries that usually precede complaints. Apparently, some of your pigs have wandered past the agreed border and trampled his winter onions. You write back, slowly, carefully. You apologize. You promise a fence. You do not mention that his onions grew 3 feet from the last recorded boundary, and that your pigs were merely exploring. Diplomacy is, as ever, the art of pretending you believe each other's fiction. By midday, the rain has begun to slip through the ceiling of the chapel. A priest reports the altar cloth is now damp, the psalms curled at the edges, and St. Edmund's statue now drips from the nose. You promise repairs. You add it to the growing list. A parchment somewhere now reads: turnips, pigs, altar leak, soap, onions, ghost in East Tower, stair rope, cook's mood, dog. You step out into the inner ward around the same time the rain decides to become personal. It comes at you sideways, turning your cloak into a damp tent and your boots into wooden sponges. You walk anyway. It's important they see you, that the people know their Lord endures the same cold, the same wet. It builds loyalty, and also fungus, probably, but mostly loyalty. You circle the yard, stopping near the well to test the rope yourself. It frays under your fingers like old hair. You nod, not to anyone, just in general, a gesture of tired agreement with gravity and wear and time. You pass the smithy next. The forge is going, hissing steam every time the wind forces water through the cracked shutter. The blacksmith raises a hand in greeting, face slick with sweat and rain. You nod again. You're starting to feel like a statue that only does one thing. Back inside, you climb to the solar again, grateful for dry stone underfoot. The window here overlooks the lower ward. You see sheep huddled together, like guilty conspirators, chickens under carts, a goat on the stairs again. That goat is going to start charging rent soon. You sit. You remove your cloak, steaming slightly in the cold air. You stretch out your legs and rest your boots by the brazier. They hiss. You hiss. The room smells of wax, damp ink, and wool. Then you hear it, somewhere, faintly, the distant call of a horn. Not an alarm, not quite, but the kind that says someone has arrived, and someone else will now be wet and angry, and expect you to do something about it. You drag yourself to the hall once more. It's a merchant, not just any merchant. This one is soaked, smiling, and dragging a cart of goods that absolutely did not get approval to pass the lower bridge. He offers you spices, wools, a bundle of furs that look suspiciously alive. He wants coin, shelter, and possibly your niece's hand in marriage, depending on how the negotiations go. You offer him shelter. Not the marriage. You point him to the guest tower. North corner. Draughty, but dry. He bows too many times. He smells like wet nutmeg. As the sun drops behind the clouds, though it never really showed itself, the castle begins its slow shift toward evening. Torches are lit, rushes are scattered across the floor anew. The cook announces that the stew is edible again. Everyone cheers, not because it is, but because cheering is warm. You sit by the fire with a new trencher. You eat slowly. The meat is tough, the broth watery, but the bowl is warm, and you can feel your fingertips again. Outside, the storm groans, the wind hurls itself at the shutters, and the rain keeps testing the limits of stonework carved by masons who are long since dust. You rise, walk the tower stairs one last time, just to be sure. You check the latch on the main door. You peer into the dark. You nod to the guard. You feel the stone under your feet and the cold in your spine. Then at last, you return to your chamber. The dog is dry now. He offers you half the blanket. You accept. You lie back. You are cold, tired, wet in your soul. But the castle stands. You stand. And for one more night, that is enough. The storm passes in the night. It doesn't end so much as retreat. Slowly, like an army with second thoughts, the thunder fades first, then the wind, and finally, sometime in the smallest hours before dawn, the rain thins into mist, and then silence. You wake to that silence, not the peace of stillness, but the eerie quiet that follows a night of noise and violence. The castle feels heavier in its stillness. Every creak of timber sounds like a voice clearing its throat. The dog is asleep at the foot of the bed, snoring lightly, tail twitching as if chasing something in a dream. You stay under the blanket longer than usual, not because you believe it will warm you, but because it's the only protest you're allowed. Eventually, the day insists. You rise, stretch, wince at the cold. Your boots are not dry. You put them on anyway. The fire in the hearth is little more than a ghost. You add a log, watch it hiss, wait for the first curl of flame. Outside the arrow slit, you see the castle yard, mud, puddles, slate gray sky. Rain still clings to the stone like regret. In the corridor, the air is damp and full of murmurs. People speak softly after storms. It's a kind of reverence, or maybe exhaustion. You pass a maid carrying a bundle of wet linens. She nods. A guard rubs a stiff shoulder and mutters about rust on his chainmail. A squire is sweeping out the entrance hall with a broom that's more handle than bristle. Breakfast is better than usual. Someone baked this morning. The bread is warm, thick, full of barley and honey. You tear off a piece, let the steam rise, and for a moment, just sit there in the hall, watching the light try and fail to break through the clouded glass. Osric appears with more scrolls, always scrolls. He places them on the table with the exaggerated care of someone hoping they disappear on their own. Roof tiles, he says, and salt, and your cousin has written again. Of course he has. You unroll the scroll. It's long. Too long. Your cousin has mastered the art of complaining as a performance. He has taken offense at something you didn't say, in a letter you didn't write, about a feast you didn't attend. He demands clarification, apology, and possibly your favorite hunting dog. You set the scroll aside and mentally light it on fire. Then comes a sound you haven't heard in days. The bell in the east tower. It rings twice. Sharp, clean, and curious. Not danger. Not attack. Visitors. You rise. Your cloak is still slightly damp, but it will do. You walk to the courtyard and see the procession just reaching the gates. 2 riders, cloaked in dark wool, their horses muddy, their faces hidden under hoods heavy with water. They dismount. One of them removes their hood. A woman, mid-30s, travel-worn but upright, Her clothes are expensive but dirty. She has the look of someone used to speaking quickly and being obeyed. Behind her, a man climbs down from the second horse, older, silent, carrying a satchel full of scrolls and a rusted dagger. Not a bodyguard, a chronicler. The woman introduces herself, a messenger of the Queen. Of course, you nod too quickly. You offer her warmth, food, space, and ask no questions. For now, they're taken to the guest quarters in the West Wing, one of the few places that hasn't recently leaked or caught fire. You retreat to your solar, suddenly aware of the state of your sleeves and the smell of your boots. You sit at the window watching the yard, watching people scurry like ants shaken out of a jar. Word spreads fast in a castle. Even when people don't talk, their eyes carry the message. A queenship's messenger. Here. You know what this means. Letters, orders, requests, and above all, attention. Royal attention, which is, famously, the worst kind. You summon Osric. You send for the castle's best wine, not very good, but better than the watered ale. You send for the cook. The kitchen scrambles, and as you wait, you stare at the damp flagstones and wonder how many tiles you can afford to replace before winter. You wonder what the Queen wants. By late afternoon, the woman reappears. She hands you a scroll sealed in deep blue wax, the royal emblem pressed into the center like a threat wrapped in civility. You take it. You break it. You read. It's a request. That's what they always call it. A request for your support in an upcoming council. Not a war, not yet, but a decision. And decisions in court always spill blood, either quickly or in the slow, cold way that ruins families and fortunes. You answer diplomatically. You thank her. You promise thought, deliberation, loyalty, words that mean nothing and everything, depending on how you say them. She accepts your hospitality for one night only. In truth, you think she'll stay 3. That night, a feast is prepared, not lavish, but full. Barley stew with roasted fowl, steamed greens, spiced pears, poached and served in borrowed silver bowls. Wine flows, laughter echoes. A bard plays something halfway decent, and for a moment, you forget the leaks, the pigs, the dripping beam above your bed. After the meal, you retire. The wind is gone, the sky is heavy, but no longer angry. The moon tries to push through the clouds, and almost makes it. You lie in bed, blanket up to your chin, listening to the crackle of the hearth. The dog lies at your feet. The candle burns low. The guest tower is quiet. You fall asleep thinking of scrolls, and boots, and queens and tiles. And tomorrow, always tomorrow, something will need fixing. The next morning arrives cloaked in fog so thick it turns the courtyard into a painting smudged by an impatient hand. You open your shutters and find the world has vanished. No stables, no gates, not even the dog you left sleeping beside the fire. Just pale gray soup, blanketing everything. The air that rushes in is damp, soft, and oddly quiet. Fog doesn't make noise. It swallows it. You wrap your cloak around you and wait. No birds, no carts, no early shouts from the guards. It's like the castle itself is holding its breath. There's something about fog that unsettles everyone. In battle, it hides movement. On the road, it erases landmarks. And in a castle, it plays tricks, turning footfalls into whispers, shadows into men, and silence into something with teeth. You dress slower than usual. Hose, under tunic, belt, cloak. You sit for a moment and stare at the wall, waiting for your thoughts to arrive. They don't. Only your feet find the motivation to move. Downstairs, the great hall is dim. Torches are lit, even though it's morning. The Queen's messenger sits near the hearth, eating a bowl of stewed grain and saying nothing. She looks more rested than you expected. You give her a polite nod, and she gives you a curt one back. One of those exchanges that carries 50 different meanings, and none of them urgent. Osric arrives with the day sip's complaints. First, the stonemasons never showed up. Their cart got lost in the fog, and now they're either at the priory or in a ditch. Second, a shipment of dried beans has gone missing, which is being treated as a full-blown emergency by the kitchen staff. Third, someone left the chapel door open again, and the cat has adopted the altar as its new domain. It bit a priest. You nod, slowly, and sip your watered ale. The messenger doesn't linger. By midday she's packed, cloaked, and mounted, her scribe trailing behind with a face full of damp parchment and disappointment. You stand by the gate to see them off, not because you must, but because it's expected. Fog curls around your boots. The towers above you are only outlines. The riders vanish down the road within seconds, as though swallowed whole. You head back to the tower. Your fingers are stiff again. The wind is gone, but the cold remains, heavier somehow, as if the storm soaked into the very stone. You hear your boots echo as you climb the steps. Left, right, left, thunk, the rhythm of leadership. In the solar, you light a fire yourself. It's a small rebellion. Normally someone else would do it, but there's something deeply satisfying about coaxing a spark into flame, especially on a day like this. You sit beside it, warming your hands, staring into the small orange heart of the fire until the rest of the castle fades away. Then you remember the accounts. The ledger sits on the side table, thick, bound in hide, stained with thumbprints and oil. You flip it open and begin to read. You always think you'll get through 10 pages. You never do. You read about grain stored and grain lost, about nails purchased and never delivered, about boots bought for the garrison, of which only 9 pairs arrived for 12 men. There's an entry from last winter: 2 sheep unfit for consumption, donated to the priory. You vaguely remember that. The monks never forgave you. By late afternoon the fog lifts, just enough to reveal the inner yard. The stonemasons return, sheepish and soaked. The lead mason explains, at length, that the fog tricked them into following a frozen stream for an hour. You ask no questions. You simply point to the roof tiles. They nod and begin hauling stone up the ladder. You walk the grounds. The mud squelches underfoot. A goat has escaped again and is standing on a barrel near the latrines, bleeding like it's declaring dominion over the lower bailey. You briefly consider knighting it. You do not. At the smithy, the blacksmith is repairing a dented helmet. You ask who it belonged to. He grimaces and mutters, "Someone from last summer who thought it was decorative." You nod and leave him to it. He prefers iron to people. You stop at the chapel. The door is shut now. A small sign has been hung on the handle. It reads, "Beware the cat." You step inside anyway. The chapel is dark but dry. Candles are lit. The altar has been reclaimed, though the cat now watches from the choir loft, tail twitching, eyes glowing like twin coins in the gloom. The priest sees you and offers a blessing. You accept it, more out of habit than belief. You sit in the last pew again. You close your eyes. You remember your first day in this place. The cold, the echo, the smell of old wood and new duties. You remember the weight of the keys they placed in your hand, the literal iron weight of responsibility. You remember not sleeping. That hasn't changed much. Outside, the castle breathes. Stone settling, people moving, distant laughter. A bell rings in the courtyard. Someone marking the hour, or perhaps a pigeon landed on the rope again. You return to your chamber as the sky darkens, not from sunset, but from cloud. Fog, again, spilling down from the hills like ink over a map. The fire in your hearth is still burning. The room smells of wool, smoke, and the faint spice of whatever someone used to polish the wooden chest near your bed. Dinner is bread, butter, dried meat, and a small cup of wine you didn't ask for. It's a quiet meal. No guests, no musicians, just the sound of crackling wood and your own breath. You sit near the fire until it burns low, and then you rise. You undress slowly, tunic off, hose loosened, cloak draped over the chair. You crawl under the blanket and feel the weight settle on your shoulders like the roof of the world. The dog leaps onto the bed a moment later, circling once before flopping down like a sack of grain. He presses against your legs, warm and real. You stare at the rafters and listen. The fog presses in again. You sleep with the faint feeling that something is coming. And in the morning, something always is. The morning begins not with light, but with shouting. You're jolted awake by a voice in the courtyard, echoing off the walls like a misplaced trumpet. You sit up too quickly, bump your knee on the wooden frame, and mutter something unnightly. The dog stirs, growls softly, then decides it's not his business. He stays curled in your blanket while you stumble toward the shutter. Outside, the fog has lifted, partially, but what remains hangs low and thick over the ground like a ghost that overslept. Figures move through it, half-formed silhouettes with buckets, spears, and loud opinions. You open the window further just in time to hear Osric's unmistakable voice barking about spilled oats and somebody's responsibility. You sigh. Downstairs you dress with efficiency born from long practice. Hose, boots, tunic, surcoat, belt, cloak. You skip the fine outer robe. Today does not feel like a day for robes. You descend the spiral stairs and arrive at the courtyard, just as the oat crisis reaches its dramatic peak. Apparently, one of the supply carts from the outer village arrived with a broken axle and spilled half its load into the muddy patch near the pig pens. The pigs, seeing an opportunity, have declared war on containment. 3 are already inside the granary. 1 is attempting to climb the steps to the chapel. A 4th is simply screaming in triumph. You approach. Osric turns to you, eyes wild, parchment fluttering in one hand. They've eaten the good rye, he says. The winter rye. You nod solemnly. He begins listing consequences. You quietly hand him a sausage roll from the kitchen bench and send him to sit down. You deal with the pigs yourself. It's not graceful, it's not noble, but it's effective. You clap your hands, shout, stomp, and chase the invaders back toward their pen with the grim energy of a man who has absolutely no dignity left to lose before noon. The castle watches in polite silence. 1 guard begins to clap. You silence him with a look. By mid-morning, the oat crisis is contained. The pigs are sulking, and the cook has salvaged what remains of the grain, now spread across long boards, to dry, and already being argued over by 2 bakers and a priest. You leave them to it. In the great hall, breakfast has been laid out. A trencher of black bread, a wedge of goat cheese, and a mug of small beer that smells faintly of nettles. You eat without ceremony, while 2 scribes approach with more parchment than is reasonable for one day. The first carries news from the coast. A merchant ship foundered near Dunwich during the last storm. Survivors arrived at the priory, wet and full of stories. You're asked whether you'll offer supplies or send a rider to confirm the tale. You nod and hand the matter to a guard captain who's currently chewing his breakfast with 1 tooth. The second scribe brings a list. You hate the list. It is the monthly report of repairs, broken hinges, cracked tiles, mice in the grain store, a suspicious smell near the east stairwell that may or may not be connected to the missing stable boy. You read it carefully. You nod again. You pass it to Osric, who is now returned and is wiping oat from his boots. He receives it like a man accepting a holy relic. You spend the next hour in your solar, pacing. Outside, the fog is lifting more with each passing minute. You can see the walls again. The stables, even the far tower where the archer with the lazy eye is standing perfectly still, probably asleep. The sun is trying its best. You lean on the window ledge and watch as life reasserts itself. The washerwomen are hanging linens across the courtyard. A group of squires is being shouted at by a knight who hasn't realized his greaves are on backward. The chaplain is arguing with the cat again. And then, a rider. Not from the queen this time. You know this because he's alone, covered in road dust, and wearing a crest you haven't seen in months. Your cousin from the western marches, the one who swore never to set foot in your lands again. After the goose incident, at last year's harvest feast, he rides in, stiff, pale, and clutching a letter. You receive him in the small audience chamber. He doesn't bow. He doesn't smile. He places the letter in your hand and says, "It's begun." Then he sits down without further explanation. You break the seal. Inside, a name, a list, a castle you once visited as a child, and an accusation. Rebellion. Not yours. Not yet. But near enough to matter. Someone's made a move against the Queen's steward in the south. A small force, well armed. They've taken a minor fortification and sent word to several lords, including you. The messenger wasn't intercepted. It was meant to arrive. You don't speak for a long while. Your cousin clears his throat. They shall come here next, or past here. You nod. He steps right. The castle feels heavier now. Every stone a burden, every door a weakness. You summon Osric. You summon the captain of the guard. You ask for the full inventory, arrows, flour, pitch. You ask about the drawbridge chain, the wall torch supplies, the readiness of the signal horn. They all look at you like you've just asked the sun to stay in the sky a bit longer. You look back at the letter. There's no signature, no crest, just a black mark where the wax should be. You know what it means. You have seen it before. You once read about the revolt of 1173, how castles once thought loyal turned cold, how nobles hedged their bets with silence, how messengers rode through the night with no banners, only promises, how castles were tested, not by siege engines, but by hesitation. You stand in the doorway and watch the yard again. The sky has cleared. The sun is out now. Everything looks honest, but so did everything yesterday. You spend the rest of the day quietly. You walk the walls. You nod to guards. You ask about the armory stockpile. You speak to the cook about salted meat. You write a letter to the Queen. You don't say much, only that your loyalty stands, and that you are ready to receive instructions should the wind shift. You seal it in red wax. That night, you don't sleep easily. The castle groans in its bones, and for the first time in many weeks, you wonder what it sounds like when someone raises a siege ladder against your walls. The wind has changed. You feel it before you even open your eyes. Something subtle in the air, the way it moves, the way the sounds of the castle have sharpened. You lie still for a moment, listening. The fire's out again, the dog is gone, and there's something in the silence, not tension exactly, not yet, but a kind of readiness, a hush that waits. You dress faster this morning, no lingering by the hearth, no glancing at the gray sky through the slit window. Hose, tunic, belt, cloak. You shove your boots on without checking if they're still damp. They are. You don't care. Outside your chamber, the hallways are already stirring, not the usual groaning pace of a cold morning. This is brisk, alert, clipped footsteps and quick voices, people making themselves busy without being told, people who know something is in the air, even if they haven't been told what. You descend the steps to the courtyard. and find the guard captain waiting. Rider spotted, he says, before you can even open your mouth. Banners? He shakes his head. No colors. 3 of them. Too fast for merchants. Too clean for outlaws. You nod and signal for the gates to remain closed. They arrive within the hour. 3 riders, cloaked in dark wool, each with a sword strapped high, and the posture of men who have spent the last 10 hours trying to outrun a rumor. Their horses are foamed and panting. Their eyes scan everything. Walls, guards, window slits, not in fear, in measurement. You meet them at the gatehouse. You don't let them inside, not yet. They introduce themselves by title, not name. Envoys of the Southern Alliance. That's all. No crests, no parchments, just voices carefully pitched to sound reasonable and urgent. They want to speak with you. Privately, briefly, respectfully. You say nothing. One of them, tall, scarred, the kind who's done more than just carry letters, says the word again, alliance. You finally reply. You tell them you already have one. You turn your back. They leave, but not far. They set up camp a short way down the hill, in the old mill clearing, too far to hear, but close enough to be seen. A reminder, a message. The guard posts are doubled. The word spreads fast through the castle, faster than you'd like. You hear whispers as you pass. Envoys, Black Seal, the Queen, Siege. That last one always hangs in the air a bit longer than the others. At dinner, fewer people speak. Even the bard seems hesitant to play. A half-hearted ballad about St. George dies quietly after the second verse. You chew roast venison that tastes like ash, and push your trencher away half full. After dark, you climb the north tower. The fog is gone, the moon is out, clear sky, the kind of night you'd enjoy, if not for the knowledge that riders from a rebellion just shared your air and counted your walls. You look out across your land, fields, orchards, far houses with smoke curling from chimneys. It's peaceful, still, but you know how fast it changes. You've read the account of the siege at Kenilworth Castle in 1266, how they held out for months, how water ran low, how disease crept in, how messengers stopped arriving, and how those inside started measuring loyalty in weeks, not years. You walk the battlements slowly. You check the arrow loops, the oil stores, the cauldrons at the ready. You ask the captain if the gate chains were inspected. He nods. You tell him to inspect them again. Back in your chamber, Osric waits by the hearth, sipping something that smells like old wine and worry. He tells you the envoys haven't moved. He tells you they've lit no fire. He tells you one of them stood watching the castle for over an hour. You ask if they looked cold. He doesn't answer. You sit at your desk. You begin to write, to your neighboring lords, to your queen, to your cousin in the north, who owes you one last favor. You write until your fingers cramp and your wax seals run dry. Each letter says the same thing. I am not the first. I do not plan to be the next. I stand ready, but not alone. At midnight, a boy arrives with a message, scrawled, rushed, smudged in haste. Another castle, 2 days south, taken. No warning, no fire, no siege, just open gates. You stare at the parchment. The dog returns and settles at your feet. You lean back in your chair and stare at the ceiling beams overhead, listening, not for footsteps, for the next choice. Because in a castle, decisions come slow, but once made, they echo forever. And in the dark you begin to plan. The morning brings frost. Not snow, not yet, but the hard, glittering kind of cold that creeps up the stone and turns the flagstones slick with invisible death. You wake before the bell, before the servants, before the fire even tries to stir from its ashes. The dog is gone again, probably hunting kitchen scraps. Or ghosts. You wrap your cloak tighter and rise, already knowing what kind of day this will be. Cold means work. Cold means preparation. Cold means choices. You descend the tower steps in silence, passing empty sconces and windows rimmed with ice. The courtyard below is already stirring. Quiet voices, muffled boots, a smith's hammer ringing like a heartbeat. Someone has lit the forge early. You can smell the smoke and steel even before you step outside. The envoys are still there. You see them from the wall walk. Their camp like a black smear against the pale grass. Still only 3. Still waiting. Still daring you to speak first. You don't it. Instead, you summon your quartermaster. You ask about supplies. He blinks, swallows, and begins listing numbers: bushels of grain, salted meat, smoked fish, dried beans, enough for 3 weeks at best, assuming no surprises. You ask how long if you feed only those who fight. He looks away. 5 weeks, maybe 6. You nod and send him off. Next, the armory. You step into the cold stone chamber. Shelves lined with crossbows, barrels of arrows, racks of spears, shields stacked like old plates. You check the count. You inspect the weapons yourself. There's no room for trust anymore. Not here. Not now. You pick up a sword. It's thus yours. You haven't drawn it in months. It's up lighter than you remember. Heavier too. You set it down carefully and walk on. By midday your castle knows. Not the full truth. Not the words, rebellion or war, but something close. They know a shadow is growing. They know the gates might close soon and not open again for a while. The steward begins reorganizing rooms. More cots in the tower. Extra firewood by the stairs. Buckets filled and placed at intervals. These are not siege preparations, not openly, but they're close. In the great hall, you eat with your captains. Bread, cheese, dried figs, a cup of wine each. You speak quietly. You talk of walls, of ladders, of loyalty. You do not mention the queen. You do not mention the envoys still watching from the tree line. You ask each of them one simple question. Would your men fight for this castle? And each of them, young, old, experienced, half drunk, each of them answers with some version of yes. One says, if I can pick who stands beside me. Another says, if you sit or at the wall with us. And one, the archer captain, just nods once and says, always. It is more than you hoped, less than you need. That evening, a raven arrives, black, silent, carrying a scrap of parchment wrapped in waxed linen. It stuts from the Queen Sep's chamberlain. Short, sharp. We are aware. Reinforcements delayed. Hold. That sips it. Hold. As if it were that simple. As if holding were just a matter of grit and mortar. As if a castle could hold on faith alone. You burn the message in the brazier and watch the ash curl into itself. Later you walk the outer walls again. The moon is out. The wind is back, and the hills beyond the forest glow faintly in silver. The envoys are gone. Their camp is cold and empty. Their fire nothing but a black stain on the grass. They left no message. They didn't need to. The silence is the message. You return to your chamber in silence. Your cloak is soaked from frost. Your boots leave a trail behind you. The castle creaks around you. Timber, stone, lives pressed together. You sit on the edge of your bed. The fire crackles. The dog returns, flops down, and begins snoring within seconds. You lean forward, elbows on knees, and listen to the quiet again. You know what Sep's coming. It isn't set fire. Not yet. It's the sound of decisions hardening into consequences, stone into strategy, silence into siege, and the frost creeping through your bones is just the beginning. By morning, the frost has turned to ice. Thin sheets coat every surface, the flagstones, the walls, even the wooden beams where mist has settled in the night and frozen into delicate patterns. The castle glitters in the first light like a jewel, cold and cruel and utterly indifferent to your mood. You don't waste time dressing. Hose, tunic, thick wool, a second cloak. You're moving before your mind even finishes waking, because today isn't about thought, it's about readiness. Your muscles know what to do. Down in the courtyard, your people are already working. The kitchen fires are lit early. The bread ovens are glowing like red mouths. Buckets are filled and lined up beside every hearth. The stables steam. Even the chickens walk with purpose, clucking like soldiers on patrol. No one says the word siege. Not out loud, but it hangs over every movement, every glance, every muttered order. You feel it on your skin like a second layer of clothing. Osric meets you by the old granary, where two carpenters are reinforcing the shutters with thick planks of oak. He's holding a slate board and a piece of charcoal, his mouth already halfway through a report. We've begun rationing the flour. Pitch barrels move to the tower stairs. The chapel's bell rope has been replaced. The outer gate's chain held under stress. 8 oxen, 17 pigs, 49 hens, counting the goat. You nod. He nods. You move on. Every part of the castle now feels like a question being asked. Can this beam hold weight? Will this wall withstand fire? Will this person stay loyal? In the armory, you find the old blacksmith sorting blades. He's laid them out across a long wooden table, each wrapped in oilcloth, each labeled in a hand that looks carved more than written. He doesn't look up as you enter. He just says, "The best ones are in the middle, for those who'll still be standing." You say nothing. You touch the hilt of one, yours, from years ago when your fingers were thinner and your heart more certain. It fits differently now. At midday, you eat on the wall. Not in the hall, not in the solar. You take a loaf of bread, a wedge of hard cheese, and a boiled egg, and climb to the highest point of the keep. The wind is sharp, clean, and cruel. It cuts through wool and bone alike, but it keeps your mind clear. From here, you see the land, your land. To the north, rolling hills, skeletal trees, a winding stream now stiff with ice. To the south, fields, fallow and pale, dotted with the remains of harvested crops. To the east, the forest, dark and unreadable. And to the west, the road, still empty, still waiting. You watch it like a man watching the horizon for a storm he's already heard in his sleep. You return to the chapel before dusk, not for prayer. Not really, but because it's quiet and warm, and there are fewer decisions to make here. The priest nods to you, then retreats into his chants. The candles burn with small, stubborn flames. The cat watches from the rafters, tail curled like a question mark. You sit in the back and breathe. You remember the siege of Rochester again. How King John brought in 5 siege engines, undermined the keep, set fire to the props beneath the stone, and collapsed an entire tower. You remember reading that the defenders held for 60 days. They ate horseflesh, rats, old parchment soaked in broth, but they held. You wonder what you would eat on day 60. The quiet doesn't last. A guard finds you in the chapel, just as the sky begins to bruise with evening. He doesn't speak at first. He just looks at you with that tight-lipped expression all soldiers wear when the message is bad. You follow him to the outer wall, to the west, and there on the road, not far now, dust, not a campfire, not a merchant's cart, not a hunting party, dust, moving quickly, Small, measured, intentional. You say nothing. Your heart doesn't set race. It hardens. You call for Osric. You call for the gate watch. You call for your captains, and then you climb. You stand on the parapet above the gate, arms folded, cloak snapping behind you in the wind. They draw closer. Maybe 30 riders. No banners. No horns. Just shapes and hooves and silence. When they set her close enough, the lead rider stops. He looks up at the wall and removes his helmet. He's young, clean-shaven. His armor is polished. His eyes are cold. He raises a hand, not in peace, in greeting. You don't move. You don't speak. You wait, because this is what castles are for. To wait, to measure, to stand until something makes you fall. And as the rider drops his hand and turns back to his men, you know this is not the last visit. That night, the castle doesn't sleep, not properly. The dog curls tighter at your feet, twitching in dreams of things you hope are simple. You rise well before dawn. There sets no point pretending anymore. The fire has died. You don't relight it. You dress in the cold, slowly. Tunic, hose, surcoat, boots, belt, sword, the full weight of responsibility. Piece by piece, across your body, you pin your cloak last, standing before the mirror with hands that no longer shake, your past shaking. Downstairs, the castle is already alive. Someone's rung the early bell. Once, not alarm, not yet, but the kind of signal that moves people just a little faster than usual. Bread is baked, handed out in thick slices. Hot broth is passed around in wooden cups. Children are kept indoors. Old men stand in doorways and look west. Osric meets you by the stairs with fresh parchment in one hand and a look that says he barely slept either. The riders didn't make camp, he says quietly. They circled, watched, took notes. You nod. He hands you the parchment. It's not a report, not exactly, just a list, names. People inside the walls, those you can count on, those you think you can, those you're no longer sure of. You read it, you commit it to memory, then you toss it in the fire and watch the edges curl black. Outside, the riders are gone, but not far. Their tracks are fresh. Too fresh. The road is wet and half frozen, but still they made no effort to hide their passing. They want you to see. They want you to wonder. So you stop wondering. You act. Orders go out. Double the sentries. Prepare the murder holes. Check the stocks of pitch, of oil, of stones. Move the livestock into the inner bailey. Fill the cisterns. Clean the crossbows. Assign the squires to sharpening, to binding, to fetching. Everyone is busy now. Busy is good. Busy is quiet. You call your captains to the solar after midday. The fire there burns high. You feed it more wood than necessary. You want heat. You want the crackling roar. You want your men to feel like they're in the heart of the keep, not just structurally, but spiritually. They arrive one by one. Some in full armor, some not, all of them serious. You don't raise your voice. You don't bang the table. You speak in a tone so calm, it forces them to lean in and listen. You tell them what you know, what you suspect, what you will do. You don't ask who steps with you. You already know. There's a map on the table. You trace the road. You mark the places a siege camp could form. You note the trees to cut down, the sight lines to clear. You speak of flanking, of fuel, of timing, but mostly you speak of holding, not fighting, not winning, holding, because in the end, that's what this place does. It holds. It has for 100 years. It will for 100 more. As the men file out, each carrying orders like torches. You remain alone for a moment. You look out the window. The clouds are thick again. No sun today. Just gray. It doesn't matter. The sun doesn't have to shine for you to see what's coming. By evening, the castle is sealed. Not closed. Not yet. But sealed. The gates are watched. The drawbridge is half raised. The portcullis rests heavier in its frame. Every flicker of torchlight looks like a signal. Every gust of wind feels like a messenger. You walk the walls again at sunset. You speak to the archers. You touch the stone. You look out at the horizon. There are no enemies in sight. But you know better now. Enemies don't begin with horns. They begin with silence. You return to your chamber in the dark. The dog greets you quietly. The fire is lit, this time. Someone sep's been kind. You remove your belt, your boots, your cloak. You sit on the edge of your bed for a long time. Then you speak aloud. Not to the dog, not to anyone, really. Just to the walls. We are ready. The walls say nothing back, but they have heard. The next morning arrives like a question no one wants to answer. You wake to a quiet that feels too deliberate. The kind of silence that isn't peaceful, but watchful. Your room is cold. The fire has gone out again, but not from neglect. Someone doused it during the night. A precaution. You find that interesting. You hadn't given that order. You rise slowly, dressing with care. Your cloak is dry. Your boots are not. The dog is nowhere to be seen. And that worries you more than it should. Down in the courtyard, there's a low hum of movement. Quieter than yesterday, but sharper. The guards speak in short bursts. The servants carry themselves differently. No one's running, but no one's meandering either. The fog has returned in patches, curling along the western wall, and clinging to the edges of the outer buildings, like smoke that forgot where the fire was. You climb the battlements. The wind is still, and there they are, tents. Not far, not at your gates yet, but close enough that you can see the pale canvas through the breaks in the trees, the flicker of early cook fires, the glint of metal at odd angles. They've set up in the hollow below the old orchard hill. Clever, protected, sheltered, not visible from the low road, unless you know to look. They are not hiding. They are establishing. You count banners, or rather, the lack of banners. They're not showing colors yet. That's deliberate. They're waiting for you to name them as enemies. You don't yet. Not yet. Instead, you return to the hall and call for your captains. They come quickly this time. No chatter. No questions. They already know. You lay out the facts. They have arrived. They are not attacking. Yet. They are watching. Waiting. Maybe probing. You ask for reports from the walls, from the stables, from the tower stairs. Everything is quiet. Too quiet. The old knight who's been with you since your father's time speaks first. Do we treat them as guests? He asks. Tone dry as burnt bread. You answer without blinking. Not unless they knock. Later you ride to the outer gate with a small escort. No fanfare, no herald, just you and a half-dozen riders. Armed, but not armored. You stand on the path just beyond the moat, watching the trees. Eventually, someone steps out. It's the young commander again, the one from the first visit. He doesn't speak. He simply hands you a scroll. No wax, no seal. Just ink on coarse parchment. You read it. It's not a demand. That's an offer. Join them. Throw your banner in. Secure your lands, your people, your title. Be part of the new order, rising in the south. No bloodshed, no siege, no fire, only realignment. It's written like a contract, but it smells like betrayal. You roll the scroll, hand it back, and say only, I already have a banner. Then you ride back to the gate. Behind you, the man doesn't follow. He doesn't speak, he just watches. Back in the castle, you give the order. Full lockdown. The drawbridge is raised. The gates are barred. The portcullis drops with a groan that echoes through the keep like thunder in a graveyard. You send word to the tower. Light the watch signal. One fire. Just one. Let them know the castle has made its choice. The fire burns high. You see it from your chamber. A single plume of red above the north tower. It means, not yet under attack, but prepare. You hope someone is watching. By dusk, the tension has settled in like smoke in a room with no chimney. Everyone feels it. Even the dog has returned, pacing the yard like a soldier. The kitchens work in silence. The smith hammers slowly and with purpose. The younger servants have stopped asking questions. They sit here watching the adults now, waiting for fear to crack. You once did let it. After the meal, you walk the walls again. The tents remain. A few more now. They spur not building siege engines. Not yet. But the earthworks have begun. Low piles of timber. Trenches. Defensive ridges. This is no visit. This is a promise. And you intend to answer it. Back in your chamber, you light the fire yourself. You sit at the edge of your bed and unroll the old map your steward recovered from the library. A diagram of your keep, drawn decades ago. You trace the weak points. The forgotten stair behind the kitchen. The old cistern that hasn't held water since your grandfather's time. The patch of wall that's thinner than the rest, hidden behind the armory. You write notes. You seal orders. You whisper to stone, and the castle listens, because castles remember. Every betrayal, every torch, every winter, and if they are coming to break you, they will have to earn it. The first arrow doesn't fly until the fourth day. Until then, it's all silence and tension, and the quiet, aching weight of waiting, the kind of waiting that creeps into your muscles and makes you clench your teeth without realizing. You sleep in armor now, not full plate, just mail and padding, but enough that you wake every hour with a sore back and a sharper sense of reality. The dog has started sleeping under the bed instead of on it. Even he feels it. The enemy keeps building. No horns, no declarations. Just labor. Earthworks, ramps, logs, dragged through the woods. The kind of siege that starts like a garden. Quiet rows of stakes and supplies, tents and shovels. And then suddenly you realize the orchard has disappeared behind a wall of timber and sharpened pikes. You send scouts, carefully, quietly. One doesn't to return. You don't to speak of it. Your steward brings you updates hourly now, not just food stores, though those are running tighter, but injuries, disputes, small rebellions inside the walls. Someone punched a baker, someone stole a handful of oats, someone scrawled traitor on the laundry wall with candle soot. You deal with each matter calmly, quietly, firmly. You understand now why your father went gray before you were born. On the third night, you hear movement near the wall, not shouts, not horses, just rustling, distant, deliberate rustling. You climb the tower yourself. The moon is out, clouds pass over it like curtain folds, and there, just there, shapes moving in the brush, just past the range of your archers, watching, measuring. You don't call an alarm. You just nod to your captain, who knows what to do. On the fourth morning, just before dawn, someone fires an arrow. It sets a warning shot. It thuds into the outer gate like a question. You answer with steel. The castle surges to life. Bells ring. 2 quick tolls, then silence. Torches flare to full brightness. Arrows are distributed. Guards take their positions. Oil is heated. Doors are barred. Voices become sharp and short. No one runs, but no one walks, either. You go to the west wall yourself, below, in the clearing movement. Not a full charge. Not a siege. A test. 12 men. Lightly armed. Fast. They don't yet reach the gate. Your archers cut them down in the mud. The rest scatter. Retreat. You don't cheer. No one does. Because that wasn't set the attack. That was the knock on the door. Now they wait to see how hard you slam it shut. Later that day, they send another scroll, tied to another arrow. It lands in the courtyard beside the well. You read it. It says simply, "There's still time." You write nothing back. Instead, you walk the ramparts, and then you do something unexpected. You order the musicians to play. Lutes, reeds, a drum, something loud and ridiculous and defiant. Music echoes across the battlements as the sun sets. You stand at the highest tower and raise a goblet, not in toast, not in celebration, but in message. You drink. And below, in the distance, the enemy watches, because castles are not just walls and weapons, they are voices. And yours just spoke, loudly. The next day, the real siege begins. The first full day of siege begins without thunder. Not a bang, not a roar, not a storm of hooves or horns, just pressure, like a slow hand pressing against the outer walls of the world. You wake not to shouts, but to stillness. Too still, the fire is out. The dog is gone again. You move to the arrow slit and see nothing at first. No smoke, no movement. Then you see it. The road has vanished beneath a new wall, not stone but timber, stakes, shields, a palisade thrown up overnight. Their perimeter is complete now. You close the shutter. You sit in silence. There's no breakfast today, only a crust of bread and cold broth, served quickly and without ceremony in the main hall. Everyone's posture is different, leaning forward, heads down, eyes flicking toward the door every few minutes. There is no chatter, no mention of weather or pigs or weddings, just waiting. You eat quietly. The cheese is dry. The bread is stale, perfect for siege food. Osric joins you, bleary-eyed, smelling of ink and anxiety. We Seb stockpiled all remaining grain in the tower cellar, he says. Move the salted fish to the chapel vault. The west cistern is full. The rats know too. You nod. He continues. Mason reports the northwest wall is sound, but the drain below it might be a weakness. ISB stationed 2 men there. One has a bad foot. The other sleeps with a spear. Between them, we might last a week. You almost smile. The morning is quiet. No movement from the enemy. Not yet. Just the new wall watching you. So you prepare. You check the towers yourself. Each one from the main gatehouse to the old pigeon perch that hasn't housed birds in 5 years. You run your fingers along the stone. You test the trapdoor near the buttery. You speak to every guard, even the ones who look like they've already decided how this ends. You tell them the truth. This is your home. No one takes it but over your bones. They believe you, because your voice doesn't shake. By midday, a scout returns through the drainage tunnel. He's wet, filthy, shivering, but breathing. He says the enemy has brought catapults, small ones, light siege gear, not meant to level your walls, meant to batter the soul. He also says something else. They set you're building a trebuchet. That changes everything. You gather your captains. You light a fire. You pour wine and let it sit untouched on the table. You speak plainly. They think we sell fold before the stone flies. One captain, the young one, asks, "And what if we don't sit?" You answer. Then we teach them why our walls were built. You give orders. Strengthen the towers. Reinforce the inner stairs. Create a second line of defense inside the keep. Hide stores. Ration the good meat. Post a runner to the chapel every hour. If the bell rings twice, everyone moves. You sleep that night in full mail again. The dog returns, curling beside your feet. You watch the shadows dance on the wall, cast by the dying hearth. The first stone lands the next morning. It doesn't break anything, just slams into the outer yard and sends a spray of frozen mud into the air. People flinch. That's all the enemy wants. For now. The second stone follows an hour later, hits the granary roof, shatters the beam. No one inside. Not yet. The third comes at dusk. It lands just outside the chapel. No damage, but close enough. You go there after dark. The priest is still lighting candles. He doesn't speak. He doesn't stop. You light one too, in silence. The dog stays at the door, watching the dark. You stay until the bells ring once. All Sep's quiet for now. Back in your chamber, you sit at the window. You think about the siege of Toulouse in 1217, how the defenders poured boiling wine on the attackers when they ran out of oil, how they burned their own outbuildings to deny shelter, how they lit bonfires on the wall to show they weren't afraid. You wonder if you sit'll do the same. You hope it doesn't come to that, but if it does, you sit you're ready, because this is your castle, and if they want it, they still have to earn it. The next morning doesn't come with sunrise. It comes with shouting. You're up before the light anyway, sitting fully dressed by the hearth, listening to the fire crackle like it's telling you secrets. The dog growls low, not loud, just enough to say listen. Then comes the knock at the chamber door. Quick, sharp, twice, a soldier's knock. You open it before the second finishes. Movement on the west wall. The guard says, a group, small, fast. You don't rinse to ask questions. You said are already moving, down the stairs, through the hall, across the courtyard, slick with mud and ice. Soldiers gather in twos and threes, their faces pale and eyes darting. You push through them and climb the parapet. From the top, the world is still half-shadowed in morning mist. But the west wall is clear enough. They tested your line again. 7 bodies lie scattered in the brush. 2 of them manage to reach the base of the wall. One still holds a rope, its end coiled neatly beside his gloved hand, as though he meant to tidy up before the climb. They are not looking for weaknesses anymore. They are confirming that you know they you're coming. And now they know you do. You order the bodies left until midday, not from cruelty, from messaging. This castle does not flinch. By noon, the archers report more movement. Not attacks, just shifting, repositioning. You see it yourself. Shapes in the trees, figures scuttling behind the low barricades, flags that twitch like they're waiting for the wind to decide who to follow. You walk the inner keep. You check on the bread ovens. Still hot, still churning out flat rounds of oatcakes and barley loaves, stacked high and dry. You check the infirmary. Not full yet. A boy with a broken finger, a woman who burned her hand on a pot, a guard with a cut on his scalp. The healer is tired but sharp. You thank her, and she nods without smiling. You check the gatehouse. The drawbridge chain is under tension. The portcullis is locked down. There's a cauldron of pitch warming above a hearth you ordered built last year. Just in case. It was the right call. You hold another meeting. The captains arrive faster now. No delay, no grumbling. They come because they know it matters. You tell them what you know. You tell them to prepare for the real push. Not today. Not yet. But soon. You don't explain how you know. You just do. They trust you now. Or they fear you. At this point it doesn't matter which. You return to your solar and write another letter. Short. Precise. A warning to your nearest neighbor. They are here. They are serious. If you wait too long, you'll be surrounded too. You give it to your best rider, with orders to take the old path through the woods. He doesn't hesitate. He takes the letter and rides without a word. That night, the drums begin. Not music, not war drums, just a steady rhythm. Low, slow, distant, like someone teaching the ground to shiver. It doesn't stop. You hear it in your chamber. You hear it in your sleep. You hear it in your bones. And in the morning, it sits still there. No stone thrown, no banners raised, just the sound, reminding you. They haven't forgotten you. They separ simply waiting, but not for long. The drums continue through the night and into the next morning. Not louder, not faster. Just steady, like breathing, like a clock ticking down towards something you can't yet see. When you wake, the dog is pacing again, restlessly circling the chamber. He won't eat. You won't either. Your appetite has left with the sound of your heartbeat echoing inside that rhythm. You dress slowly, not because you're tired, but because today, more than ever, every movement feels like a decision. You choose the warmer tunic, the heavier belt. You wear your sword, even though you won't likely need it inside the walls. You want the weight. You want the sound it makes when it moves with you. Down in the courtyard, the castle is moving like a machine. The guards are sharper, the cooks are faster, the runners are sweating by midday, carrying updates and small notes and whispered warnings from wall to wall. You don't need to speak much anymore. They know what to do. But still, some things fall to you alone. You climb the northeast tower before noon to inspect the platform where the oil cauldrons are set. They're warm, not boiling yet, but ready. You check the barrels. The guards flinch a little when you approach. Out of habit, out of respect, you tell them well done. It matters more than they expect. Below in the field, something new. A banner. Not a noble crest. Not the Queen's. Not yours. Not any of the familiar ones that decorate the old tapestries in the hall. Just black cloth. Blank. You stare at it for a long time. Then you climb down. You return to the chapel. You don't pray. Not exactly. You sit in the pew again, in silence, and watch the stained glass flicker in the light of the midday sun. The priest joins you without speaking. He sits beside you, offers you half a boiled egg and a piece of dried fruit. You take them. The silence is better than any sermon. By afternoon, the first fire arrows come. Not many. Just a handful, a warning. A test. They arc through the air with a sound like cloth tearing. 3 miss entirely. 1 hits the corner of the stable and sputters out. The last lands in the courtyard, hissing against wet stone. You do not respond. You do not give them the satisfaction. But you post extra men on the tower. And you double the guard near the granary. You spend the rest of the day walking the interior. You stop in the kitchens, where a young girl is learning to boil water over a flame so weak it's barely more than breath. You help her stir. You visit the hall, where 2 of the squires are playing at sword drills with broomsticks. You correct their stances and make them repeat it 10 times. They complain. You smile. Then you make them do it 10 more. You stop by the healer Sep's corner. Someone left a loaf of bread there. A good one, the kind made with honey, not oats. You don't ask who it was, but you tear a piece off and leave the rest behind. That evening, you receive a letter. Not by arrow, by boy, one of the village lads. He made it through the woods, snuck past the siege line under cover of dark and mud and wind. He brings a scroll sealed in red. It's from your neighbor, the one who waited too long. They sieve, chosen sides, not yours. They're sending troops, south of your walls, soon. You thank the boy. You give him a warm meal and a bed. You tell him he's done more for this castle than most grown men. Then you sit by the fire and open your map again. You begin marking what sip's no longer yours, and you begin planning what you still want us to give. That night, the drums stop. The silence is worse, because now you know they're ready, and in the morning, they will ask the question, and your castle will be the answer. The silence at dawn is absolute. Not a bird, not a breath, not even the usual creak of the castle's old beams stretching into the day. You wake to a stillness so deep it presses on your ears like water. The dog doesn't move, neither do you. For a full minute, you lie there, listening, waiting. Then, faintly, the horn, not yours, theirs. It sounds once. Low, long, not a charge, not a call to arms, a summons, the kind of sound meant to wake not just the garrison, but the stone. You stir dressed before the echo fades. Boots, belt, cloak, sword, the old one, the good one. The dog follows without being called. In the courtyard, your people are already gathering, some armored, some armed, some barefoot in nightshirts, clutching spears and frying pans, and the will to fight for something they don't fully understand. You look at each of them. No one speaks. You climb the western tower. Below rows of them, ranks, more than you thought, more than you saw, shields raised, helms on, flags lowered. They set her not here for spectacle. They set her here to take what you once did give. The young commander is there again. Mounted, still clean, still calm. He raises one arm. A standard bearer steps forward and unfurls a second banner. Red. Now they Seb declared it. Now it's Sep's official. Now they are not raiders, not envoys. Now they are an army. Your captain turns to you. Orders. You wait. You watch. Then you nod once. Loose. The archers answer first. Arrows whisper through the cold morning air. Some fall short. Some strike shields. A few strike men. One rider topples backward, kicking the air as his horse bolts. The army doesn't move. Not yet. They were expecting that. They wanted it. Yusef just opened the door. They surge. First the front lines. Runners, shield bearers, a few ladders. Then the carts. Siege towers. Covered rams. You count them. 2, 3, 4. One more behind the tree line. From the walls, your archers fire again. Buckets of oil are overturned. Torches lit. The cauldrons roar. You hold. Your castle holds. At the gate, the ram begins its rhythm. Thud, thud, thud. Like a second heartbeat, dust shakes loose from the masonry. You feel it under your feet, through your boots, through your bones. You descend to the inner wall. Here is where it happens. Not in the maps, not in the councils. Here, you stand beside your men. You draw your sword, and you wait. The ram hits harder. One beam cracks. You don't flinch. You think of Rochester again, of Toulouse, of Caerlaverock, of every castle that was ever more than stone. Every castle that outlasted hunger and fire and betrayal. You think of the names carved into the base of your chapel wall, the forgotten servants, the smiths, the boys who died holding towers, the women who boiled water and sharpened blades and refused to leave. This is their castle too. And now, it's time to prove it. You raise your sword, and the gate splinters. The gate doesn't fall all at once. It breaks like a tooth, a loud crack, a splintered beam, then a groan, long and low, as iron and oak shudder under weight and time and fury. You hear it from across the yard, feel it like a gut punch through stone. Then comes the second strike. Thud, crack, groan, and then the wind changes. Suddenly, the courtyard smells like pitch and wet hay and blood. The smoke from the towers drifts lower now, curling between the ramparts. smudging out the sky. The men on the walls shout, short, sharp orders. Arrows flash downward like rain with iron tips. Buckets are tipped. Oil spills, screams follow. You are at the base of the stairs when the gate gives way. It doesn't explode. It slumps. A single hinge gives, then another. Then the timber splits. Snap down the center like a chest cavity pried open. Behind it, the ram rolls backward, pulled by its team, and then the enemy pours forward. They scream as they run, but not like men in rage, like men in need. They want inside. You meet them at the breach. You and your front line, 8, 10, 12 of them with shields, spears, makeshift axes from the carpenter's bench. One has a poker from the hearth, another, a scythe. It doesn't matter. They fight because they've already decided not to run. The first man through the gate doesn't make it past the threshold, neither does the second. The third gets as far as the stables before a rock from the high tower caves his helmet. You lose a man. Then two. Then the butcher's boy, who stood too long trying to pull his knife free from a corpse. You retreat to the second wall. You light the fuses. The first fire trap triggers at the base of the stairs. Flames lick up and fill the corridor with smoke and chaos. The second one doesn't go off. You hear someone coughing. You hope it's not one of yours. They flood the yard, but they don't know it the way you do. They don't know where the flagstones slope. They don't know the stair that ends in a drop. They don't know the latrine passage was widened last year to act as a trap. You fall back, slowly. Reluctantly, you trade space for time. You let them think they're winning. Because castles are not meant to stand still. They are meant to collapse on purpose. You collapse yours well. The old grain shed goes up next. You ordered it soaked with oil 3 days ago. The flames leap 6 feet high and catch the wooden struts of the west gallery. A dozen enemy soldiers turn to ash. By evening, they control the gate, the yard, part of the chapel stairs. You still control everything else. The keep, the food, the water, the high ground. You regroup in the great hall. 27 defenders left, who can still fight. 12 wounded. One priest who refuses to leave the tower. The dog has a cut on its leg and blood on its muzzle. Your steward gives you the last report you'll hear from him. He's going to the east wall to help light the final traps. You clasp his hand before he goes. No words, none needed. Upstairs, in the solar, the map is still spread on the table. You look at it for the last time. There is a plan. One last one. You light the candle, seal the letter, mark it in red. Then you hand it to your youngest squire. You leave at dawn, you say. If there is no dawn, he asks. You meet his eyes, then leave anyway. He nods, takes the letter, and says, "It was an honor." You don't let yourself answer that. Outside, the enemy sets up torches along the wall. They spur not hiding anymore. They think they've won. They haven't set. Not yet. Not while you still have walls. Not while your keep still stands. Not while you still breathe. The dawn doesn't break. It bleeds. The sky is a smear of gray and smoke. Ash drifts through the air like snow. Soft and wrong. Somewhere in the chapel a bell rings once, then falls silent. No one speaks. No one moves quickly now. Everything is slowed. The siege has drained the speed from the world. You haven't slept. You sit beside the fire in the solar, watching the candle gutter. The map is gone. The letter is gone. The squire is gone. Slipped through the tunnel before first light, wrapped in silence and luck and prayers you didn't know how to say. Below, the courtyard is quiet. Bodies lie where they fell. Yours. Theirs. Some you can still name. Others are just armor and blood now. The enemy doesn't advance today. They wait. They know what you have left and what you don't. They expect surrender. They expect you to come down the tower steps and hand over your sword. They expect the white cloth. They do not understand. This is your castle, and you do not surrender castles. You bury them. You walk the last of the ramparts at sunrise. Each stone feels heavier now. Every arrow slit, every loose shutter, every burn mark on the floor. These things know you. You've lived in them, through them. You've bled into the cracks. You are as much a part of this place as the bell tower and the drawbridge. The final defenders wait in the great hall. They've gathered what remains: bows, axes, a pot of boiling wine. Not oil. Oil ran out yesterday. Wine will have to do. You speak, just once. Not a speech. Not a rousing cry, just the truth. This castle stands as long as we do. They nod, and then they smile. Even the dog wags its tail. The enemy makes their move just before midday. You hear them first. Shields clattering, footsteps rising, a single trumpet blaring from the far side of the yard. They come in waves now. Tighter formations, serious, focused, ready to sweep the keep. You light the last fuse. It burns slowly, too slowly. You want it to go faster. They reach the steps. They pour up them like water in a broken barrel. You pull back inside the hall, breathing slowly, sword steady in your hand. The doors crash open, and the fire takes them. The wine explodes first, flames licking the ceiling, then the timber stores, then the drapes, the tapestries, the banners, smoke billows, wood screams. The hall becomes a furnace. They try to pull back. They can sit. The stairs collapse. You hear the tower groan. One final trap, buried in the walls. A last choice you made in silence 3 days ago. The ceiling cracks. You give the order. Not to fight, to hold. You raise your sword one final time, and then the stones begin to fall. Not fast, just steady, like rain. And in the end, the castle does not fall. It ends. By nightfall, the keep is gone. Smoke rises where the heart once stood. The enemy holds the yard, the stables, the gate, but not the walls, not the spirit, not the name, not you. Days later, the letter reaches your allies. The queen reads it herself. She weeps. Then she orders every rebel banner on the southern border to be taken down or burned. And in time, long after the smoke clears, long after new stones are laid over old bones, songs will be sung of the castle that did not surrender, of the Lord who fought until the last stone fell, of the people who made walls into legends, of you. And when people speak your name, they won't say traitor, or coward, or fool. They shall say, defender. And the silence that follows will not be empty. It will be earned.